and you can get sucked into being quite conventional, and then you're on a deeper level, you're slightly dissatisfied, and you don't know why. But the answer, the reason is that you're rendering something nicely, but you're not actually saying anything. And it took me a very long time to really to realize that every painting, every sculpture I do, I've got to say something.
It's so great to meet you here on Zoom, Paul.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me to.
No, that's a great pleasure, and I love your work. I initially saw your sculptures, and then realized you do paintings as well. But yeah, beautiful work.
Thank you. I'm actually I was surprised when you I think you tagged this meeting as Paul Wuensche sculptor. And I don't really think of I think of myself more as a painter, although
really
a sculpture is something that I've been doing I sort of in the closet for many years, because publicly I was a painter, but I had this secret desire to do sculpture. So I was spending hours and hours doing sculpture. But I was kind of a bit shy about it.
No, but I also have a secret desire that I do, and that I also don't tell people about. So I understand completely.
Yeah.
So mine is paper, but no. But I was thinking also last night. I was wondering what came first, the sculpting or the painting. And now you say you actually it's painting.
Yes. So painting started very early on, and sculpture just sort of naturally evolved from it, because I was doing a lot of drawings for an exhibition, which was figure drawings, and they were very sculptural. They were I guess I really liked form and light and dark, and so I was really trying to emphasize that in these drawings. And at a certain point I looked at them and I kind of looked at myself and I thought, aren't you just trying to do sculpture?
Really? Yeah, but but I was thinking also that maybe the one is sort of beneficial for the other. So if you paint a portrait and you sculpt a face, then you have the same sort of thought process there.
You certainly do, in that they're both very much about drawing. I mean, sculpture is nothing but drawing in space, but it is the same skill set. But I think it's the same when you're drawing in a very kind of sculptural 3D way. It's the same thing that's driving you along. It's just this kind of obsession with form, things kind of receding into space and revealing themselves in light, which I always loved. I guess, when I was a kid, I went to see Michelangelo and great sculptors, and I just thought, oh, that's amazing, and the human figure as well, all the muscles, everything. I don't know, it was great.
But as a child, so you were drawing a lot, or were you already sort of showing the signs then?
Yeah, when I was a child, in a way, I was like the typical child who likes drawing, because what I wanted to draw were things like dogs and animals. I used to have these books where they sort of showed you how to draw animals, and I would copy those.
Yeah,
and,
I know those books.
Yeah. And often they were kind of artists who worked a lot in graphite, and they did this quite detailed and sort of impressive. When you're a child, you think, wow, that's really nice. And I wanted to learn to draw like that. I mean, I sort of started in a way teaching myself just by copying these things. But then I was quite good in school, and the art teacher said to my mum, "Oh, you should find somebody to teach him oil painting because he's got the potential." And my mum found a teacher called George Israel, who lived around the corner from us. And I went to see him aged 11. And he said, "Well, what do you want to do? What do you want to learn?" And I said, well, I'd like to learn, I want to learn how to draw detail, which I think is kind of what most kids would have said. And he said, "Well, I can't teach you that, and I don't really want to, but I can teach you something even better." And he introduced me to the idea, which is a fundamental idea for all painters, which is to see bigger shapes and relationships between shapes, and to see things in an abstract way. And for some reason, I went along with it completely wholeheartedly, and I absolutely loved it. And I had a good relationship with him. I loved his work, and all I wanted to do was paint like him at that stage. And I mean, he was a very good painter. He was an RA graduate. He went to the RA before World War II, so he was old, but very experienced. And so he was like this mentor that I had for about a year. I just went to his Saturday afternoon painting class, and it was just me, this 11-year-old, surrounded by very elderly people who was doing and I was the most demanding student you could imagine. I wanted to know absolutely everything. He sort of almost didn't know quite what to do with me, but he kind of fed me what he could.
But isn't it amazing? Because at that age, I think you sort of think you can do everything and you want to do everything. Whereas I think if you say older students, sort of you want to try and just do the best you can,
Yes. I don't know if I had that kind of limitless confidence, but I had limitless curiosity and hunger for it, and I was really open. He would tell me to do something, and I would really do it. Whereas I could see his older students, they didn't really listen to what he was saying.
That's also the thing. I think the older you get, the more stubborn you get.
Yeah.
But while you were talking about, you were saying that you wanted to draw detail.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I spoke to a young South African artist, and he's self-taught, and he lives in this small community, and he said that the children around, because I asked him, okay, so what do children make of your art? So he said all they want to know is if he could draw them. That's for them. They wanted to have somebody to draw them, and then they want to see that they look like that. And I think that's a child's sort of perspective, that if you could draw somebody and it looks like that person, they think you are a good artist.
Yeah, but there's something in that that you never let go of, because there's something about art that's like magic. It's like this illusion, and somebody does a realistic portrait, and you go, wow, that it's like this. But I think where I was lucky is that George Israel kind of introduced me to something much deeper, because he would say forget about getting the likeness. If you forget about getting the likeness, you'll get the likeness.
Oh yeah.
If you look at other things, you'll get the likeness as a sort of byproduct. And I think the other thing that was great about him is that he was very freeing. I've never lost this thing that I don't worry about things like that. Even if I'm doing a portrait commission, or I know that I will do better in that respect if I just to stop worrying about it and let go. And he also taught me to make mistakes, to not worry about making mistakes, to be loose and free. And that's something because I teach adults quite a lot now, and I actually have to say to them, very often they get quite tight in the way they're working. And I go around the class, so every 20 minutes I'll look at somebody's work. And if somebody's getting a bit tight, I say to them, I want you to make 3 mistakes by the time I get back to you in 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I said, that's an order. I want 3 mistakes. And it really works quite well. It discombobulates them and gets them into a better frame of mind. And the other thing I tell them is, I want you to make it 60% right, only 60% right, and then move on to the next bit and then make that 60% right. Because otherwise they stay on one bit, trying to make it 100% right. And then the whole thing is just lost. I mean, they just get lost in this obsession with trying to be correct.
Yeah, but I think I can understand that, because I think when we create something, we want it to be something.
Yes.
You don't want to think, okay, I'm creating something, but it doesn't matter. It's a mistake. I did a few bread baking workshops, and I found that even in bread baking, that people can get extremely nervous about, and actually it's flour and water. And salt, it's all it is. It's not the most expensive thing. If it doesn't work, you throw it out. And it's almost as if people take it so seriously that it has to be the perfect bread, and it doesn't have to be. And I can imagine that even if you take a paint and you sit in front of a canvas, of course you want to make it sort of something beautiful.
Yeah, but the problem is that what you really want ultimately is to make the whole feel beautiful.
Yeah.
Whereas what people do is they get stuck on one small area. So even if they did that really well, it's kind of meaningless because what people see is the whole picture.
That's true.
Yeah. So yeah.
But I saw your there are two things that I want to say, but let me first say this one. I spoke to an architect a few days ago, and his interview will be coming up, and he said something interesting that also made me think. And he said that he's exploring different mediums that he's using, but he hasn't found the place yet where he feels it makes sense what he's doing, or it has a meaning what he's doing. So in art, did you also get that point? Did you also go through a time where you sort of painted and did paintings, but didn't feel yet it's something that has a meaning, or did it come easy for you? Did it come quickly for you?
That's a really good question. I mean, yes, I've definitely um, struggled with that for years and years. Sometimes without really realizing it. You know, I would do paintings, and they'd sort of be okay, but I would just feel like there was something not quite right. And I think it's to do with the fact that there's this kind of tradition in figurative painting, and there's certain subjects you do, certain conventional ways you compose, and you can get sucked into to being quite conventional, and then you're on a deeper level, you're slightly dissatisfied, and you don't know why. But the answer, the reason is that you're rendering something nicely, but you're not actually saying anything. And it took me a very long time to really to realize that every painting, every sculpture I do, I've got to say something. And I used to have a rather sort of harsh mantra that I would say to myself, which was, if you don't have anything to say, don't say anything.
Okay.
You know, so I would, the upshot was that I would, what I'm essentially telling myself is, put your brush down and stop. You don't have to produce 25 paintings a day.
Oh yeah.
So if you're just going through the motions, don't do it. Do something else. And just wait, because the urge to say something will come pretty quickly anyway. But I think also that because painting and sculpture are such technical, there's an awful lot to learn just technically, and you can get lost in that. And you're trying all the time to resolve these technical problems to do with drawing, or you're getting yourself in a twist, and then you just lose sight of the whole point of doing it in the first place, which is to communicate with other people, to show them what's in you that you want to share with them.
But isn't it also that the case of the more you know, the more sort of self-critical you become? That you sort of think, oh, this cannot be right, or this shouldn't be like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you become self-critical like really early on. I mean, it's interesting because there's a sort of a really great book that came out in the 1980s called Drawing with the Right Side of the Brain, by Betty Edwards, I think, who is an American art teacher, and it was a really popular book, and it came out around the time that I was learning to draw and paint. And what's interesting about her is that she had this wide experience with different age groups. And there's quite a lot in the book where she contrasts the way that young children, like prepubescent children, the way they draw, and the way the same children will draw once they're teenagers. And it's really astonishing. And I've noticed, because I've taught those two age groups as well. And one really obvious thing that happens is that the really young children, when you put something in front of them, they will naturally fill out the whole composition. So they'll fill the whole canvas without hesitating. To them, it's like the most obvious thing in the world. So they're actually doing the composition. The moment they get to 13 or 14, everything changes radically, and what they'll do is they'll isolate one thing. They'll put it right in the middle of the page, and they'll try and draw it very correctly, and slightly stiffly, I would say. And I think that as an older artist, you have to be aware of this, and you have to try to retain some of that early impulse to just go splat across the whole canvas.
But isn't that also that time where you start feeling unsure of yourself?
You feel super self-conscious.
Yeah. I just remembered something now that you say younger children's painting. I remember my daughter, she was about 4 years old, and we lived down in Paul in the Cape, and my parents were supposed to visit, and I said to her, "Oh, go and draw a picture for Grandma and Grandpa so that they feel welcome when they come here." And she ran to her room and got all her paints and everything, and it was all quiet for a long time. And then she called me to the room where my parents were supposed to stay, and she actually painted on the wall instead of painting on a piece of paper. My idea was, paint, and she heard it as go and paint a picture for Grandma. So on the wall next to their bed, there was this huge picture where she drew herself, where she painted herself, on the wall. I mean, what could I do? I left it there for the rest of the time that we lived in this house, because I thought, on the one hand, well, that's how she understood it, and on the other hand, she had the confidence to use the wall as a canvas. But I mean, I'm sure if she was 16 and I said to her gave her the same request, she would have done it completely differently.
Yeah. I think, that for a young child, there's less separateness between you and everything around everyone and the world around you. So you spread yourself. In this case, literally.
But it's wonderful that you can see the difference. If you teach younger and older children, it must be amazing how you also can understand what you are doing. Probably, can you think?
It's been so helpful to me, because I mean, sometimes I've had a parent come with a young child,
Mm.
and the parent has also painted, and they're a little bit disconcerted because their child is doing something much nicer than what they're doing. But I also look at the kids' work and think, oh God, I wish I had a bit of that. You know,
Really?
not always, but sometimes there's
Yeah.
just that thing that you.
Mm.
But I think it is possible to have some of that as an adult.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm.
if you just kind of open yourself up a little bit to it.
Mm.
Um,
But yeah, but the other thing that I wanted to say was the painting that you did of Baron's Court.
oh yeah,
I really, when I saw it, I had goosebumps because my son lived in that street, and honestly, that painting transported me to that place. It was so touching that suddenly I realized. First I looked and I thought, I know this place, and then I read it's Baron's Court, and I thought,
yeah,
yes, of course.
yeah.
And tell me about these paintings that you did. You said in over lockdown you did them.
Yeah, so when lockdown started, I had to decide because I live in I'm in Barron's Court now actually, but I normally live in Barnes on the other side of the river. So my house is there. My partner's house is in Barron's Court, and when lockdown started, I had to make a quick decision. Shall I stay with my partner in Barron's Court, or shall I stay in Barnes? Which in a way, Barnes would have been logical because I've got my studio there and everything, I work with. But I also wanted to be with her. So I just thought, I know I'll stay in Barron's Court. I moved some basic painting equipment and over here. And then lockdown really happened. It was like nobody knew what was going to happen, but there
Exactly.
was real lockdown. And I found myself in Barron's Court, and there's no obvious kind of studio space here. I sort of use a little bedroom at the top of the house, but I loved it because in truth, I use the whole house as a studio because I checked out every single window. I thought, well, what's the view from this window, and what can I do with it? And I did some interiors as well, and it was just all so visually new and exciting to me, and the challenge of having these limitations. Limitations, it's so underrated because they're inspiring. And I love. I mean, excuse me. I had done a few of these big, detailed sort of urban cityscapes. I'd done a couple in Barnes previously, but Barnes is more leafy, and Barron's Court is more properly urban.
Absolutely,
and I like that, and I like the there's this kind of instant narrative when you paint one of these views, because you just think, well, what's going on behind these windows?
Exactly.
And,
yeah.
So and these paintings for me were different in that normally if I do a smaller painting, I'll just throw the paint on straight away, and it's usually a pretty quick affair. Whereas with this, I would I'd draw them all out in charcoal first to give myself a kind of framework, and then I gradually start sort of filling it in. And the sensation for me was and is a bit like reading a novel, because with each kind of square inch, it sort of reveals itself, like the story of the scene. And so it got I think it's got a narrative quality for most people, but for me, making it really had a narrative quality because I was really observing every
yes
inch, and yeah.
But I think also over lockdown, everything became so quiet and sort of to a halt, that we started looking differently at things. Because I remember I did an interview with a ballet dancer, and they were still in lockdown at that time in London. And she was saying to me, she said that she went on the balcony of their flat. So they live in London somewhere, and she went on the balcony, and she saw a bee on one of the flowers on the flower pot, and she stood there just watching the bee, and she was actually thinking, wow, isn't it amazing that in the life that she has, traveling from the theater to the back home, and she never gets an opportunity she never has time to just stand there and watch a bee. And I think this is the thing that you're saying now. Suddenly we within ourselves became more sort of calmed down and saw things and observed things in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, quite a lot of people had a terrible time in lockdown, but I think the other half of the population had how can I say, was like this very unusual and massive dose of mindfulness that nobody was expecting, and was unique. I mean, most people in their lives, you never get to stop time.
Exactly.
But it felt like time had stopped. And so it did give you this amazing opportunity to reflect on the meaning of your life and connect with things. I mean, how people took up the hobbies and bread making and this and that. And what I did was I got into wildlife photography.
Really?
Yeah, and because I was in Barons Court, nearby is actually across the road is Margravine Cemetery, which is a magical place. And I used to go. That's how I started the day. I would go out with my camera just for half an hour. I'd walk around the cemetery and take photographs of anything I saw, and the people that were there were in a similar mindset, similar zone to me, Whereas I still do it. I went out this morning, and there's just this rush of people going to work early in the morning, and it's not quite the same thing. I felt a little bit self-indulgent going out and taking pictures. So
it's true.
Yeah.
But I thought also I did a project over lockdown here in Vienna, and I photographed artists in their windows, and I got to speak to a lot of them. And I really thought that, I mean, of course, it was a difficult situation because the theaters were all closed, and, some of them, the freelancers, didn't earn any money. But still, you had that feeling that, and many of them said, for the first time since I was a child, I could just, get up in the morning and do what I want, or play the repertoire I want, or discover things that I otherwise don't have time for. So I think that it was those two sides. The one side, yes, we financially and maybe when there was illness, but on the other side, I think for many people, they started doing things that they normally don't have time for.
Yes. And it's really astonishing. One thing I've learned from teaching as well is just how many people are really artists at heart, like how many people who are, in jobs they don't they often don't enjoy very much, but given another life, they would have really expressed something and done something. And it is sad sometimes, but it's also, as a teacher, it's really, really nice when I get students who have discovered that and started to explore it even late in life, because it's never too late. So yeah.
And isn't that also, because this is something that I'm so passionate about, is that art, all forms of art really should have a place in the education system, so that, art and all the different forms of art should be taught alongside sciences and maths, because they are so interlinked with each other. And also, it would give many children the opportunity to express themselves.
Yes. Well, that's true. I mean, I don't know. My feeling is in the UK, there's always been a kind of separation between, like, let's put the arts over here and maths and science over there.
Yeah.
It's very artificial. You don't get. I've lived in Italy, and they don't think that way really. They think more in the way of the Renaissance, like Leonardo, who was a scientist and an artist. There was no mental distinction at that stage.
That's true,
yeah.
But tell me, Paul, now going to the sculpting. So from painting to sculpting, and you said you did it sort of in the closet.
Yes.
When did you come out then? As a
sculptor? Only quite recently, really. I mean, I suppose I came out because I started postings on Instagram, and I started an Instagram. Initially, I posted my sculpture on the same Instagram as my paintings, but I soon discovered that I started losing followers.
Really?
And I think it's because there's this ruthless kind of branding that goes on in these, so you can't muddy the waters by doing two things. You have to do the same thing over and over, and then
that's the algorithm.
Yeah, exactly. And then people know who you are, and it's and that improved, as soon as I created a sculpture profile. But I had an awful lot to learn, and still do with sculpture, and especially things like, it'd be really useful to get a handle on molding and casting and stuff, because then you're a little bit more independent. I mean, I bought a kiln a few years ago, so I can now buy work, and I buy my students' work as well. And that's quite freeing because it's not expensive, once you've got the kiln. So you can churn out terracotta things, buy them.
But that's quite a technical thing, isn't it? To be able to do the casting and the bronze. I see you have
bronze? Well, the bronze. I mean, the bronze you would have to. I mean, I go to a foundry and.
Okay.
But in theory, I could teach myself to do the molding. It's just that, if you spend a long time on a sculpture, you don't want to risk your rather dodgy skills
Oh yeah. I can
and mold it
imagine. Yeah.
yourself, when you don't feel like totally sure of yourself,
Mm. No, I can imagine. Yeah. So do you when you look at people, and this must be something probably with your portrait painting as well. So do you notice faces and shapes and noses and ears and so on? So if you look at people, do you specifically, or subconsciously, what I say, look at that ear? Is that a nice ear? Or is that a nice shape for an ear?
No, I never think that way at all. Because I'm fascinated by everybody's ears, not just ears.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't really work. I mean, if I'm totally honest, sometimes I think, but this person has a really lovely bone structure,
Oh yeah.
And it already looks kind of quite sculptural, before you start. But I think that really you have to challenge yourself to see the sculptural quality in everybody. And I think part of the art of sculpture is revealing form that you don't necessarily see when you look at someone, but when you see the sculpture, you go, oh yeah, of course, there's that makes sense, that. And I, when I look at Rodin, who really, is my favorite sculptor, really, there's a surprise around every corner. Like you turn around the sculpture, and he's revealing these planes, and it's a surprise, but there's also a strong recognition. You're surprised, but you think, oh yeah, of course that, everything makes sense. I like it when things make sense in that way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And do you do? I mean, it's mostly the sculpting you do is mostly sort of what do you call it? Just portrait or face, or
yeah.
bust.
I used to do more figure. I think because most of my sculptures are done alongside my students, and a lot of them want to do portraits, so we end up doing a lot of portraits. But yeah, I would like to do more figures. But again, you see, once you get on to, I don't know, like full figures are a little bit trickier to hollow out if you're firing them in the kiln. So that's the stage where you need those mold making skills. And I think that while I really want to do more figures, that's holding me back a little bit. So I need to practice that. But I love. Then when I've done it, I've loved it. Yeah.
But Paul, what are still the wishes for you for the future?
Well, that is definitely one of them. I would like to do some, at least sort of 3/4 life size figures. I would like to expand my sort of vision of sculpture into a more public space. If only in imagining them in a garden setting, for instance.
Oh yeah.
Because at the moment they're sort of more restrained, and they fit in the house. And I would like to think more about that interaction between the sculpture and the environment. and I have a very nice garden, and so I would initially just do it for myself, really. But that is the sort of sculpture that, yeah, it would be quite demanding for me, and there'd be a lot of trial and error, put it that way.
Okay.
And painting wise, I think that actually in both in painting and in sculpture, there's, going back to what I said at the beginning, there's, you got to focus on saying stuff. And I obviously I do that, but I don't do it enough, and I don't make myself focus on that, because that's where I think your work can really develop and take off if you start. I mean, it's literally to do with finding a voice. I mean, sounds strange to say. I've been doing this for quite a long time, and obviously I kind of have a voice, but you can always make your voice stronger and clearer. And it's very enjoyable to do that. And the more meaning you give your work, it's a virtuous circle. The more meaning you give it, the more it has, and the more it sort of sucks in meaning. It as a sort of domino effect. You do one painting which really says something, and then you think, oh yeah, but based on that, I also want to say this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I would say really strengthening and sort of streamlining my voice, and making it loud and clear.
But I do think you already are doing it. So maybe you are. I look at, for example, the paintings that you have where it's the basin with the gloves lying there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's sort of it. I love those. I love those because they are so basic, simplistic. It's something that we get to come across every day in your home.
Yeah.
And it says something, it says something about home.
Yeah.
It's that.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that you decided to paint that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think also where I've sometimes got confused, and often people do, is that they take a medium like painting, and it gets a little bit hijacked by more literary writing based forms of expression. So it's like they'll think of an idea conceptually in words, and then they'll sort of translate it into this other medium, whatever it is. And I think one of the kind of learning stages is that you've got to tune into the language of that medium itself, whether it's painting or photography or sculpture. So if you're a photographer, you've got to speak photography. You can't write an essay and then translate that into photography. But I think that I love that your podcast is called The Artist Voice, because I have long believed. I do lots of different forms of self-expression, and I used to be an editor on a poetry magazine when I lived in America. So I do a lot of writing. I like photography. I like sculpture, and I learn the piano. Music's very important. I think they're all doing the same thing. And there's a sort of rather false distinction between all these different media as though they have nothing to do with each other.
Exactly, yeah.
And so sometimes when I do sculpture or painting or whatever, it doesn't feel that different. They don't feel that different from each other, and I don't think they should feel that different.
Yeah. Mm. And it's true, if you start listening to everybody's story or everybody's motivation or what they've gone through or how they arrived at specific conclusions, then, I mean, I've done over 800 interviews and I can tell you that nobody's story is the same, yet there are very strong lines that connect everybody, from how they developed or what they saw at the end of not the end, but in this journey, what they've discovered about the art or about themselves. And I think it's so important if you think all the skill sets that artists developed in themselves by pursuing this art form. These are all things that we can apply in everyday life. You in any job, in any aspect of your life, in your personal life as well. So I think it's so important also that we hear the artist speak, because when you hear the artist speak and you look at the art, it also has that combination. It's the story behind the artwork or the art form, and it definitely makes a difference on how you then sort of interpret the art.
Oh, if you hear the artist's story,
absolutely. I've spoken to say a pianist or a musician, and they speak about, say, a specific composer whom they adore, and they play the music and they study the music, and for them, speaking about it and talking about the music, and then if you go to the concert, even if you there don't speak to the musician who plays this music, you hear the music differently. You experience the whole concert differently. So I think I know, and I have also spoken to artists who say, no, an artist shouldn't have to speak because the public has to make their own interpretation of the work.
Right. Yeah.
But for me personally, I love the story behind the artist.
Yeah.
I like to understand this person, or not understand the person, but hear from the person, or speak, or hear the story. And then there's no way that I think that your story doesn't have something to do with what you do in your art. So if I hear your story and I look at your art, I perceive it differently.
I think that I think both arguments are true. Mm. I think on some level it is nice when you well, for instance, I don't like going to an art gallery and seeing pictures that only work if you read the detailed blurb. I think it's a visual language and it needs to work on a visual level. Mm. That said, once you've if you go to the Gauguin exhibition that's on now at the National Gallery here, not the Gauguin, Van Gogh, you will get an absolute blast from just looking at the picture without knowing anything about the background. But if you do happen to also know about Van Gogh and his life and his passion and his relationships, it really adds a whole other element. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I look so I go on Instagram, on social media, and I find people that I want to talk to, but I do that by looking at what is on the page. So I saw your artwork, and then it speaks to me, and then I contact you, and then when you tell the story, and I go back and look at the art, I see it differently. This is what I'm. This is, and it's like you say, the first impact, of course. But I also know that my son is a ballet dancer, and before I go to see a performance, and he tells me the story or a little bit of background, or I know something about the rehearsal process, and I go and see it, I experience it differently. But if I just go to a performance without really knowing anything about, the story or the background, and you try to figure it out, you're not living it as much as you do when you understand the story.
Yeah, well, that's certainly true. And also, it's not always just about biography. Sometimes it's great when somebody opens your eyes and tells you what to look for. I mean, I've had that, several times in my life. Like when I was in New York, I had a friend who was much more into modern art than I was, and I used to go to the Met with him every week, and he would say, "Look at this," and he would get excited about it, and then I'd be, "Oh, yeah, actually, yeah." Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's because I'm not a musician or an artist, but if I hear somebody, so sometimes when somebody speaks about the music, or you speak to a conductor and they start explaining something about the music, and that knowledge and enthusiasm and everything that they exude when they talk about it. And that's what I think is, I don't have that knowledge, and I don't have that background. I don't know not much. I know Beethoven, but I don't know all the pieces that he wrote. But you get somebody to start talking about that, and how they like I say, their enthusiasm and their knowledge. And I think this is what artists, it's not that I think for an artist or for somebody who studies art, you have definitely more knowledge and background. And if you go to a art gallery, you look at art absolutely differently than I do, I don't have that background. So I think it's important to share it, because I think the more we know, the more we can appreciate. So the more I know about the background, now that I see example, Quivers, that artist in South Africa, in Pretoria, who we were talking about, he shows behind the scenes how he casts the things. So now you also look at artwork differently, because you see the process behind it. You see what the artist does to create this piece of work. So yeah, I think it's for me, it's very interesting. It might not be for everybody, but for me, it's very interesting, and I look at art differently in that sense.
Yes, I mean, I personally also found it really great when artists show you not the art, but show you the world. So I remember watching an interview with David Hockney, and he said, "Well, I'm lucky, because I can get pleasure just by looking at the rain falling in the puddles, and then when you see his pictures of rain falling in puddles. They're absolutely amazing and stunning, thrilling.
Yeah.
But he's also just given you the idea of just looking at something so simple. And
that's really my point as well, is that, so if you hear that, you will always in your life look at rain differently. Yes. Isn't it? Because you heard somebody who can see it differently and do something with it. So no, I think it's that's why I think we can learn so much from artists and their outlook. And like I say, you can apply it to everything in life. It's you can have a different appreciation of life if you look at it through different artists' eyes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But Paul, this was so great to talk to you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
And I love what you're doing, and thank you so much for that experience of seeing Baron's Court quietly, because I've never had the chance to see it like that, because it used to be always from the tube station to my son's apartment and back again. I never stood there and observed the whole. So I could now through your painting. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.